Okay. Hi. Good morning to Jennifer, and good afternoon for us. We are at the Italian Festival of Criminal Justice, and we are speaking actually about gender violence and crimes against women in particular. And in order to speak and to give also an international perspective, we invited to join us Mrs. Jennifer Thompson, who is a very good friend of mine, and I know her since several years today, and I don't want to spend a lot of time to introduce Jennifer, because she will do this, and so this morning for Jennifer, we are going to learn about her story, and that it is incredible. And when I firstly met Jennifer, I was really shocked and touched about her story, not only for the tragedy that in a way she suffered, but also and especially for the strength that she showed, and how she was able to build something from her experience, and her story is also about restorative justice, and with her incredible project that she founded. And so we have about 25-30 minutes to learn about her story. And so Jennifer, if you want to start, I'm here, and maybe I will interrupt you and with some quick questions. And I think that this will be a friendly chat, and in order to make Italian people to learn about your incredible story.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you having me on the program. So yes, as a way of brief introduction, my name is Jennifer Thompson. I'm going to quickly go through the beginning of my story because I don't like to stay too long on that. I really prefer talking about what I've done with my life. But in 1984, when I was 22 years old, I was in college, and so you can go to the next slide and see how young I was in 1984.
Yes.
And I was studying, I was dating, I was working, I was ready to graduate, and on July 29th of 1984, a man broke into my apartment around 3 a.m. and as I struggled to wake up, I noticed that not only did I not recognize him, but he had a knife to the left side of my throat, and as I screamed, he told me to shut up or he would kill me. Next slide, please. It became very clear that I was in grave danger. I could smell alcohol on his breath, so I knew he was under the influence of substances. I knew that I wasn't his first victim. I wasn't going to be his last victim. And so I made the decision that night to not physically fight him, because I felt like my best chances of surviving was to think through what I was going to do next and how I could stay very calm and hopefully survive I knew what was going to happen to me. So over the next 20 minutes, I studied his face, I listened to his voice, I tried to pick up on anything that he couldn't change later on, like a tattoo or a missing tooth or a piercing. And I stayed in that space in my head for around 20 minutes as he began to rape me and assault me and talk to me. At one point, I convinced him to get off of me and let me go to the bathroom. And as I was in the bathroom, I realized that I couldn't escape through the window, so I needed to come up with a different plan, which was to find my way into my kitchen, which is where he told me he had come through. So as I came out of the bathroom, I told him I was thirsty, could I have a drink of water, and he told me to hurry up. As I went into the bathroom, my first thing that I did was to turn the lights on. because I knew that he would stay away from me in light. And that gave me a chance, a few moments, to make a lot of noise in the kitchen and open the back door. And I began to run through the neighborhood, hoping that somebody could save me. I did end up on a neighbor's porch, and thankfully they were home, and I banged on the door and they let me in, which is when I was safe again. And I fainted. They called the police, and the police began to try to find this perpetrator by using canines and searching the neighborhood, but it had begun to rain, so his scent was immediately lost. And I would be taken to the hospital for what I would learn was a rape kit, where they began to collect evidence that was on my body and in my body. And it was unbelievably traumatic and dehumanizing, and it was done in a very disrespectful way. So it was just a further traumatization to a young girl who was already under an unbelievable, immense trauma. But at the hospital, I was also able to learn that after he had left my apartment and run, he had broken into another woman's apartment and assaulted her and raped her and beat her and punched her and bit her. And he again had run and evaded the law.
And
so
you learned it while you were at the hospital. They told you this.
Well, I heard her. I heard her screaming down the hallway. So she was in the same hospital as I was, and we were different ages. I was 22 and she was in her 40s, and she had a daughter my age. So our experiences were very, very similar and yet very different in some way. She was from that community. I was a student. We had different life experiences, but regardless, both of us had gone to bed thinking that our life was one way, and then somebody comes in and literally destroys everything that you had worked on your entire life. So I often tell people it's a lot like surviving a tornado or an earthquake, where everything that you were is now broken and destroyed, and there's just pieces of you everywhere. And most of you is lost forever.
Can I ask you a personal question? Were you single at those time?
I was single, but ready to get engaged. So my boyfriend and I were talking about getting married. He was in med school. I was going to graduate the next spring and go to physical therapy school and become a physical therapist. So my life was pretty planned.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was at the hospital where the police began to gather my memory. And it was very clear that I had gotten a good look at him, and they took me to the police station to begin to give an interview. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay, next.
At the police station, they began to put together what would be, called a composite sketch. And, it was done using what's called an identikit, which is just folders of facial features. So you pick out the shape of the face, you pick out the mouth, you pick out the nose, you pick out the eyes, and everything overlays the next thing. And it's very confusing, as you can imagine, because you have only maybe 100 mouths to choose from, or 75 ears to choose from. But you begin to build what your memory remembers. And the composite sketch, when they showed it to me, they asked me, did this look like the perpetrator? I said, yes, it does. And of course, it ran in the newspapers, which began phone calls coming into the police station about who the composite sketch looked like. And the most damning phone call was from a woman who said the composite sketch looked like a young man that she knew by the name of Ronald Cotton. And she said that she had seen Ronald Cotton outside of my apartment wearing the clothing that I had remembered on a bicycle at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so that was the first piece of evidence. This woman had seen this man wearing the clothes I described outside of my apartment at the time of my assault. So you can go to the next slide.
Next.
Ronald Cotton was a young man from the community. He had just been released that spring from an attempted sexual assault. So he became the prime suspect for the police. And so on August 1st, 3 days after my rape, I was called down to the police station to do a photographic lineup. Okay. I didn't have any experiences with the law or police or any of these things. So they brought me into a room, they showed me 6 photographs. They told me not to feel compelled to choose anyone, to take my time. But you know, you're 22 and they're showing you 6 photographs and you can kind of assume that one of them is their suspect. And I felt really strong about helping the police because this person had committed 2 violent assaults, and I wanted to make sure he didn't do this again. So I chose photograph number 3, which happened to be Ronald Cotton, and they told me, good job, that's who we thought it had been.
Okay, and so they in a way they commented your choice.
Yes, because the second survivor had been punched and bitten and had a flashlight in her eyes, and she couldn't make an identification. So I really felt like I had to do this for the both of us. And when they told me good job, I thought I had gotten it right, of course. So they arrested Ronald Cotton that day, and 6 days later, they called me back down to the station to do a physical lineup. So you can go to the next slide.
Next.
The police department was undergoing a renovation, so the room that they would normally have used for a physical lineup was not available. So they took me to an abandoned schoolhouse to the top floor, and they brought me into this room where the only thing between me and this physical lineup of seven men was just a table. There was no separation, there was no windows, there was no doors. It was me, a table, and a lineup, and I was terrified.
So they were looking at you, and you were directly, no mirror screen, nothing, no barrier at all.
Nothing. Yeah, and it was frightening. And of course, I'm still under extreme trauma. I feel really committed to make sure that I got this right, because I wanted to get it right. And I picked photograph number 5, person number 5, which was Ronald. And again, when I picked him out of the physical lineup, the police said, good job, that's who you picked out of the photograph. And so once again, I'm getting confirmation that I got it right. So the next thing for us to do, of course, would be to go to trial. And that was in January of 1985. They only tried my case because the second victim could not make an ID. So for 2 weeks, we sat in the courtroom and, heard his alibi, which had been false, where he said he had been. It wasn't where he was. I had to recount every disgusting thing he did to me over and over again for 2.5 days. I was on the stand, and they assaulted my character, suggesting that because my blinds weren't, made of cement, that somehow I wanted the rape to happen, that because I had gone to bed in my underwear, that somehow I had encouraged the sexual assault against my body, that somehow these things had been my fault. And I just remember sitting in the courtroom hating everyone in it, just hating them. The jury deliberated 45 minutes and found Ronald Cotton guilty of first-degree rape, first-degree sex offense, first-degree breaking and entering, and Ronald received life and 54 years and would be taken to prison to begin serving out his sentence. And of course, I was overjoyed.
You were happy. You remember you were happy? Yes.
Yeah, I was overjoyed, but yet at the same time, I was not getting any services for my own trauma. So my trauma and after the trial looked very much like depression, anxiety, panic, drugs, alcohol, like dysfunction. I could not function. And people didn't want to talk to me about what happened to me. Friends didn't want to call me any longer. My boyfriend couldn't handle what I needed any longer, so he broke up with me. My life was just a disaster. But there was this measure of at least Ronald's in prison now. So you can go to the next slide.
Next.
When Ronald was in prison, one of the interesting things was another man was brought into the prison 90 days later. And Ronald was playing handball on the prison yard and noticed him and recognized him, went back to his locker, found the photograph of the composite sketch that had been done, and realized that this was the person who had committed these crimes. And it was a man by the name of Bobby Poole.
Next. Slide.
So when he realized that Bobby Poole was in the same prison as him, he convinced Bobby Poole to have a picture made together and told Bobby Poole that he would send the picture to one of his sisters to write to Bobby Poole, but instead he wrote a letter to his lawyer, sent the picture to his lawyer, and said, I think this is the guy who committed the crimes against Jennifer and this other woman. So the state of North Carolina now overturned the decision and said that we had to have a second trial because the jury had not heard about the second victim, and there was this new name in the pile, this man Bobby Poole.
But why Ronald thought that he found your rapist?
Why did he photograph the rapist?
Okay.
Are you asking me why he did the photograph?
Yeah, why he thought that he got your rapist?
Why did he think?
Yeah.
Well, because Bobby Poole looked like the composite sketch.
Okay.
He knew Bobby Poole from the community.
Okay.
And he also said that another inmate had heard Bobby Poole bragging that he had committed the crimes Ronald Cotton was in prison for.
Okay.
So we went back to court now in 1987. This time we tried both rapes this time. And in the absence of the jury under voir dire, they brought Bobby Poole into the courtroom, asked Bobby Poole if he had committed these crimes, which he, of course, denied, and then asked us, both women, if we recognized Bobby Poole. And by now it would have been 3 years. And of course we said, no, we didn't recognize him at all, that the man in the courtroom that raped us was indeed Ronald Cotton. And Ronald got 2 life sentences this time and 35 years and would be remanded back to prison to continue serving out his sentence. So you can go to the next slide.
Next. Yeah.
So, years go by now. I get married, I have children, and I'm trying to put my life together as best as I can. And in 1995, now 11 years later, the detective in the case and the assistant district attorney of Alamance County of North Carolina came to my house and talked to me about post-conviction DNA testing.
Okay.
Ronald had asked for a DNA test. The state of North Carolina didn't have any protocols, but if they tested the DNA, my blood sample had disintegrated after 11 years, and I would need to give a new blood sample, to which I said, fine, I want you to run this test because I need to be done with this, and Ronald needs to stay in prison, and I need to parent my children. So I gave them the blood that day, and that was in the spring, and 3 months later they came back to my house and told me that the DNA test had come back, that the DNA excluded Ronald Cotton completely and was actually the DNA of Bobby Poole.
So you did wrong.
Everybody was wrong. Yeah. I mean, everybody was wrong, right? I mean, you think you're doing the right thing, you're being told you're doing the right thing, and then you find out that a terrible mistake had happened, and that not only had Ronald served these 11 years, for something he hadn't done, but Bobby Poole had been left to be free for another 9 months and had committed 24 more violent crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes. And so the actual perpetrator had committed many, many more assaults against women in the community. So on June 30th of 1995, Ronald walked out of prison a free man, and that's the next slide. So you go to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
And of course, that's Ronald getting his first hug from his mother. And I watched it on the news, like most of the country did, because this was a new thing. DNA was a new thing, but this was the first time that DNA had also been a hit on the actual perpetrator. So this was a big story in the United States, and it was a huge story in North Carolina. And of course, everybody wanted to know where the girl was and, you know, how I felt about it. And I just couldn't, I mean, I just stayed very, very small and didn't want anyone to find me for another 2 years. And those 2 years were really difficult. I had panic disorder, I had depression, I had anxiety. I was having a hard time parenting because I was so afraid that my children would get hurt. So in April of 1997, I asked for a meeting with Ronald Cotton. And that's the next slide. Next slide, please. So you'll see a picture of Ronald and I together.
Yeah.
I met him in a church not far from where I'd been raped in 1987. And we both began to talk to each other about what had happened, about what had happened in his life, what had happened in my life. And we began to exchange our stories, and we learned from each other. And, you know, I asked if he could ever, you know, forgive me. And he immediately said, I forgave you years ago. And that was the beginning in this very strange way of this really unique relationship and friendship that we were able to develop. Because what we both knew is that I had been really hurt by Bobby Poole, and Ronald had been really hurt by Bobby Poole. So at the center of all of our harm was the same perpetrator. And it was a perpetrator who did it on purpose. He was intentional. Like, he knew what he was doing to everybody, and he did it. And so from that, we began to become friends, and I became an advocate and an activist in criminal justice reform. But what I didn't know was, by stepping into that space, people were really, really terrible to me. And I received death threats. Men would say things to me that were unbelievably horrible. And as I began to do this work out in the community and in the field and in the world, I had erased, and the world had erased, my harm. And so the story was only about what happened to Ronald, and people forgot about what had happened to me and this other woman. And I did this for many, many years. 20 years I was doing this work. And what I was discovering by meeting other crime victims from these cases and other wrongfully convicted men and women and family members of both sides is that there was no space for us to begin to heal from those places that we have all been hurt. So next slide, please.
Yes.
And so I often talk about wrongful convictions and this idea of the chaos theory of the butterfly effect, right? There's this one person making a movement, and his or her movement causes all this destruction for so many people's lives. I mean, Bobby Poole destroyed hundreds of people's lives. And at the center of all that harm was this bad actor, this bad person. And in some cases, it's the criminal justice system itself that causes the harm. But we weren't talking about it in that way. And what I was realizing and seeing is there was no space for this aftermath, for this aftercare, for what happens now.
Yes.
And how do we bring people together in a space that is safe, that we can begin to heal? So next slide, please. At Healing Justice, we talk about concentric circles of harm, putting the perpetrator in the center of everything that gets done. And all the people on the outside of this circle are people who get hurt. We've got community members who think that the right person went to prison. You've got the victims from the case. You've got the wrongfully convicted folks. You've got jurors who get hurt. You've got family members and witnesses and judges and police. Everybody gets harmed. And the person who's responsible for all of it is the perpetrator. And I wanted to begin talking about wrongful convictions from that perspective. So next slide, please. These are just some statistics. We know that 375 innocent people have been exonerated by DNA. We know that 165 actual perpetrators have been identified and have committed many, many more crimes. But we also know that while we talk about wrongful convictions and the exonerated people being hurt, we have forgotten to talk about the crime victims and the fact that their bodies were raped, their family members were murdered, and again, their narrative got completely unnoticed and taken away from the story. Next slide. The exonerations, of course, cause unbelievable amounts of suffering. The wrongfully convicted men and women lose decades of their ability to create memories. Lives get lost and they can't mourn them. Children are born, they don't get to watch them grow up. They get harmed in the prison system by abuse and rape and bad health care. But also, we can't forget that while that's happening, you've got people that are victims, and we've talked to some of our murder victim family members who will say, like, I will never know who killed my child. I will never know who killed my mother, and I can't remember her voice. And if I want to go see my siblings, if I want to go see my brother, I have to go to a graveyard. And we've forgotten to talk about that. And so at Healing Justice, that's one of our big jobs that we do, is creating equity in the narrative. So next slide, please. Healing Justice creates resources for peer support. We do individual services. We have listening sessions so that people get to listen to what the experiences are. We do training and technical assistance for prosecutors, police, judges, victims advocates, and then of course our big program are healing retreats. We bring folks together in a safe space where we can begin to witness each other, validate our experiences and our harms, and heal together as a community. Next slide.
Here you are.
This is a picture of one of our healing retreats, and in that picture, what you don't see are rape survivors. You don't see, because you don't know who they are. These are rape survivors. These are murder victim family members. They're exonerated men and women. They're their family members and supporters in this photograph. And we spent the whole weekend together listening to each other, crying with each other, and learning from each other and healing from each other. Next slide. This is just a picture of some of the folks we've worked with. On your left is a young woman who was raped as a child, and the man spent 17 years in prison for the rape and was exonerated. And she talks about the struggles of how she lost that child. In the middle, there's an exonerated gentleman from Virginia who's just incredible. He spent 24 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. And on the left is one of our activities we do, which is letting go of things we're ready to let go of and literally sending them away. Next slide. This is a photograph of a grant we received from the Department of Justice. We did the very first comprehensive project working with original victims from these cases. And this was a listening session we did in Washington, D.C., where all of these folks were able to tell their stories. And on the outside of our circle were federal partners who were literally required to listen to what their experiences have been, and how when the exoneration happened, there was no one available to them. There was no services. The notification of what had happened was terrible. And so the long enduring trauma that happens to these folks. Based on that project, we created this website at the top, survivorservices.org, where you can go onto this website and see and read about the experiences of crime victims. And we've got resources available for people who will come in contact with victims, as well as beautiful videos where you get to hear their voices. Next slide. These are the videos, so you can actually click on either one of these links and listen to the experiences of rape survivors and also the experiences of murder victim family members. And they're really quite remarkable. They're each about 6 minutes long, and I encourage anybody to listen to these videos. Next slide is just a photograph of an exonerated man from a case that involved rape, and this is the victim from that case. And they have become friendly, and they've reconciled, and they've learned how to heal together. They're really remarkable people. Is a photograph from our retreat with a quote from a very famous bass guitarist, which is everything that ever vibrated is still vibrating, everything that ever was still is. It's that idea of that continuation of trauma long after a conviction. And so at Healing Justice, we are really committed to working with everyone harmed in these cases. And then the last slide, of course, is our contact information. And well, that's actually these resources that are available to you. If you want. And then the very last slide is our contact information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is, I mean, every time I heard again, I hear again about your story. Every time I learn about further details, and I mean, it is amazing how you were able to move on and make something very good, and also for exonerees, and you are right, for victims. First of all, and can I ask you just a question that I was thinking while you were talking, because you know in recent years what the discussion arrived also here in Italy, and I was wondering what do you think about the Me Too movement? I mean, the recent attention and media attention to these kind of crimes, and also at distance of many years, victims of rape that come forward and tell their story. What do you think? Because maybe you are the right person to answer in a way, you know, since your story.
I have very strong thoughts about that. One is that most rape victims, most sexual assault survivors, they're raped and assaulted by someone they know. So their stories are not a case of misidentification, because they knew the person. It was a family member, it was a guy down the street, it was a teacher, it was a priest, you know, it was somebody that they knew. So this is not a story or a coming forward and they are misremembering or misidentifying. But the reality is most people who are raped, and they're raped by somebody that they know, feel incredible pressure not to report it. So 80% of sexual assaults never get reported. And of the 20% that get reported, very few of them ever make it into the courts. And when we think about sexual assault, it is an extremely low number of false rape reports. I mean, very, very small number. It's somewhere between 2 and 4% of people who come forward and make a story of rape or sexual assault. The thing that we need to be more concerned about is the underreporting of sexual assault and giving women and men permission to come forward in a safe place to report what's happened to them, even if it's a family member or somebody that is in their lives. So in the Me Too movement, what you're seeing is women who were compelled and forced to not report for years and years. And then at some point, they've lived with this trauma so long, and they realize that they've got to come forward and tell somebody about what happened to them. So I am a big supporter of the Me Too movement. I am a big supporter of believing survivors and people who have experienced sexual assault. Of course, we want to be mindful of cases that are not true, but that is such a small percentage that I want to be. I'm more concerned about cases that aren't reported, because that means that people are out there, and they're predominantly men, are out there assaulting and raping over and over and over again because they've never been stopped. And so that worries me more than anything.
Okay, great. But if you, because at the time when you were raped, you went to the hospital, okay? So you decided immediately to report the crime. So did you ever thought that it would be better to just be silent, not telling anyone what happened to you? No.
Never. But honestly, Martina, that's not who I am. I mean, I think at the core of who I am is a fighter for justice. And I am always going to fight for victims and survivors, which means I'm always going to fight for rape victims and survivors, murder victim family members, and wrongfully convicted men and women and their families. Because in my heart, these are the victims, right? So I'm always going to fight for truth. I'm always going to fight for justice, always. And I don't want people getting away with things that they do and harming people. I don't want that.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, I think that unfortunately our time is up because we have a tiny agenda. But I'm sure that I thank you very much for your time, and I hope to have you in Italy very soon. Would be great, because I believe that you should teach at law school in every part of the world. You know what I'm thinking about your story, and yes, and so thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day over there.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you in Italy. So I guess now I should just say ciao.
Yes, ciao. Good job. You have learned Italian.
Thank you.
Bye, Jennifer. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.